Good evening, everybody. It's wonderful that you're able to join us tonight. This committee that pulled this event together this evening has representatives from many different mental health and youth services organizations in Oak Park and River Forest, and we are very, very interested in bringing information to parents on substance abuse issues. I hope that you will have a chance to go through the van. It is very illuminating if you've not already been through there. It's kind of horrifying. People are coming out with their eyes wide open. But we have some speakers tonight who are going to offer us some presentations on specific issues, including, I'm going to hand it off in just a moment. Matt Quinn will begin with us. And Matt is his title is Community Relations Coordinator with Rosecrans. And he provides community relations in Chicago, DuPage, Kane, and Kendall counties. He's a member of the Community Alliance for Prevention in Naperville, Juvenile Justice Council in Kane County, and a consultant for Connect for Life program through the Naperville Police Department. He joined Rosecrans in 2015, and this evening he is going to speak to us about binge drinking. So Matt will begin with his presentation.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Thank you for coming out. I appreciate it. It's for Chicago. It's a beautiful spring day. There's a lot of other things you could be doing, gardening, but you are here wanting to get this information, this education. So thank you for coming out. I appreciate it. So we have a distinguished panel. So I only wanted to take maybe 10 minutes in a limited amount of time. So I only wanted to take a few minutes just to run through what I felt like was really important information regarding binge drinking, in particular in this community. So let's jump right into it if it's okay. So let's define it. What is binge drinking? There's several different definitions, but they're all kind of in the same ballpark. So for the sake of argument, let's talk about 5 drinks, okay? Some places define it as for adult males, 6 drinks, adult females, 4 drinks. The Illinois Youth Survey, which I'm gonna cite in a second here, defines it as 5. So let's simplify it and say 5 drinks in any one sitting. Now we say one sitting, that could be an hour, 2 hours, an evening, whatever the case may be, right? So when we define binge drinking, that's what we're talking about. So what I want to do is the first couple, when I talk about trends, and then I'll talk about health effects, I want to talk about the Oak Park area. Unfortunately, the Oak Park River Forest participates in the Illinois Youth Survey. Who here is familiar with the Illinois Youth Survey? Probably a few of you, right? For those of you that aren't, it's every 2 years, on even numbered years. There's tens of thousands of 8th, 10th, 12th graders, and I'm going to talk about the 10th, 12th graders in this community that participate in the survey, and it asks about not only drug use, but mental health, all these different questions. For the sake of tonight, I'm going to talk specifically about binge drinking, okay? And if you look at some of the statistics in terms of binge drinking, the past, in 2018 versus 2016, you'll see that there's actually some encouraging developments in terms of the rates of binge drinking with 10th and 12th graders at OPRF. Especially with 12th graders. You're talking about a decrease from 32% in the past 2 weeks to 23%. That's a 9%, that's really, really good. So Ginger, where's Ginger at? You know, and this might be hype, so whatever's happening at the school here, you know, and even with 10th graders talking about a reduction as well. Keep doing what you're doing. In a lot of ways, something's going right in terms of binge drinking. There's been a big decrease in the past couple of years, so this is good news. Now, unfortunately, some of this is accompanied by increases in vaping and other issues, right? But let's just look at binge drinking and recognize the positive developments that have occurred regarding binge drinking in the past couple of years, and acknowledge that I think there are some things at the school and in the community that are helping to decrease. And I think it's important to identify what those things are and to continue to do those things. Now, with most things in life, right, there's good news and what, right? So what I wanted to show you is I wanted to compare it with other suburbs, the suburban areas of Chicago, and you'll see when you talk about 2016 and 2018, 12th graders in particular, because that's where the big increase is, 25% in 2016, 19% in 2018, compared to the Oak Park numbers. The Oak Park numbers are still higher than suburban Chicago. So there's still work to be done, right? And so seeing this, anybody that has any idea that, well, Oak Park, binge drinking amongst high school kids is not an issue in Oak Park. Incorrect. Any illusions you have of that, this should dismiss that, right? So it's still something that should be a target, and it's still something that should be worked on to get these numbers down to, if not the other suburban areas, but really the goal should be even lower, right, in terms of that. So good news, bad news. There's been a lot of positive developments, but a lot more to be done in terms of bringing it down to a level that's, well, 0 would be the only level that's acceptable, right? But, and you'll see here, something that stood out to me when I put this together is that you see a big jump. I mean, there's a huge jump between 10th and 12th grade. Here, let's just look at Oak Park. Look at that jump from 10th to 12th grade. And I was thinking about that. I've been driving around the car, I'm thinking about how do I talk about this? I think that in general, it looks like up until 12th grade, there's really good in terms of really kind of that expectation and what's going on. Those are relatively low numbers. My concern would be is with 11th and 12th graders, does the expectations about not drinking and do those start to get a little blurry? And is there kind of this thought of, well, you're 17, so maybe it's not as bad? And I think that might be some area and some room for improvement is trying to be a little bit more, I don't want to say strict or firm, but trying to recognize that even a 17 or 18-year-old drinking is going to be much riskier, much more impactful than a 21, 24, 25-year-old. And I think that's what I'm seeing is kind of that gray area in that 17 to 18-year-old range where parents might start to be a little bit more permissive, and I think there's room for improvement there. So in terms of how to improve this, I want to hit on just a few things over the next several minutes because it's all about education. It's about educating not only teens, but I think even more importantly, is educating parents in the community why it's important to hold certain expectations about not drinking and why that's important. And I'll talk about this kind of idea of that drinking, for some parents, they see it as kind of a rite of passage for high school. And I want to talk about why I feel that's really if you look at research, which I'm going to talk about, you look at all the science. I mean, I hate to be blunt about this, but to see binge drinking in general as a rite of passage in high school, it's an outdated model of parenting. If you simply want to look at research and science, it's outdated. That's just not what the science says. That's not what the research says because of the risks involved with it. When you look at brain development, rapid brain development now into the mid-teens, mid-20s, late 20s, right? That's the research is showing that there's a lot of brain development, even with 17, 18, 19-year-olds. And drinking at that age puts them at much greater risk especially with this area, the prefrontal cortex called I always have a hard time pronouncing this, occipital-frontal cortex. I'm going to get a little sciencey here for a second on you. So, or the OFC, right? It's the area of the frontal cortex right behind your eyes, hence the occipital, which is short for kind of the eye area, right? So when teenagers use any substances, alcohol, marijuana, right? What happens is any substance use, it messes up the ratio of gray matter to white matter that develops during that period of time, and that's really impactful in terms if you want a higher ratio of gray matter to white matter. And the more alcohol use, nicotine use, marijuana use, it disrupts that. And what it does is it throws off decision-making, judgment, planning, and it leaves that brain more susceptible to addiction, alcoholism, seeking out those substances as a way to manage life, right? So I think that's really important that not only young people, but parents are aware of that even with, certainly a 13, 14, 15-year-old drinking is hugely problematic. But a 17 or 18-year-old drinking is still problematic. And that's what I'm seeing through the data, is I think it's important to recognize that that's still problematic at that age because of a lot of the science behind it. So when you look at, and this is the other, so there's really, in my mind, there's two critical pieces to this in terms of the science. One is the brain development. The other is risk for progression. When you talk about anybody under the age of 18, and it's the younger they are, the higher the risk. Because in communities like this, and this is another theory that I have, it's based on nothing. It's just a theory I have, right? Oak Park, very, very nice community, right? You have a lot of successful families in this community. And I think what may be happening sometimes is you have parents that maybe are, oftentimes are very successful in this community, have a nice job, nice homes, nice cars, right? And they may have, when they were in high school, maybe they drank, and they turned out okay. But the mistake or the danger in that is thinking that, well, I turned out okay and I did those things, so it's okay for my kids to do those things. Because I have parents, sometimes after I do these presentations, they come up to me and they say, well, man, they sheepishly say, well, I did these things and I turned out okay. And I tell them, well, if you look at 13, 14, 15-year-olds, 12-year-olds, you're looking at a flip of a coin. Now, if you started that young and you turned out okay, you might have fallen on the right side of that coin. But it's still very dangerous. Would you be willing with your kids to parent from the perspective of, well, we'll take our chance, flip of the coin, we'll see. And I'd like to think most parents are not okay with a flip of the coin chance of their kid developing a more significant substance abuse issue. So if I'm moving fast, I can just see it's 7:15 already, so I'm just trying to move along. So I'm gonna try to squeeze as much information as I can here in the next couple minutes. In terms of dangers of binge drinking, a lot of people know, you guys probably know about this. A lot of times these are events I'm preaching to the choir. But these are the types of things that we really need to promote, and we really need to make teenagers, 17, 18-year-olds, parents in the community really aware that these are very real risks that come along with binge drinking, all of them. These are all very real. And you guys probably know stories when you were in high school or friends' kids that dealt with these things. So we really need to continue to drive these things home and get parents and kids to realize that these are real issues that need to be emphasized. Just the piece of driving. To me, the biggest single risk with binge drinking, biggest single danger with teens drinking is being in a car or driving while they're under the influence. You could talk about risk for alcoholism, and that's real. But if you're talking about imminent safety issues, it's this. When you talk about the number of motor vehicle fatalities amongst teens that are related to alcohol, you're talking about 36% of the deaths. Now, the majority of them are because just teens aren't good at driving, right? They're still learning, right? But when you talk about 36% of them being alcohol related, that's a really high percentage. And again, this needs to be driven home and emphasized to our kids, to your kids, to everybody's kids, to parents, that this is a real risk. And it's not just driving. It's about getting in the car. It's not like if somebody else is driving that you get the chance to get out if the car's going to crash, right? You're in that car the same as the driver is, right? So that has to be emphasized as well. Now, this is something interesting I thought I would point to. We're hearing a little bit more, and this is kind of the scary part of the presentation. Now, we hear about Juul nicotine vaping, marijuana vaping, right? But we're starting to hear rumblings about different devices and different contraptions here for vaping alcohol. It's just something I want to put on your radar because I'm worried in the next few years you might start to see portable devices like with the Juul and other nicotine devices. You might start to see, because where there's money to be made, it doesn't matter, public health be damned, right? Where there's money to be made, there's opportunity, unfortunately. So you might start to see some of these portable devices that we're seeing that have alcohol in them where there's an opportunity to vape alcohol. So it's something to keep on your radar and to be aware of, okay? In terms of parenting, right? Can we please try to get rid of this idea that teenage drinking is a rite of passage? People were nodding when I said this. Again, you're the choir. But as the choir, you got to go out into the community and share this idea that binge drinking in general amongst teenagers, as a rite of passage, we need to let go. We need to let science and research drive that that's just not the best way to parent. We always want to parent better than previous generations, right? So let's do that based on research and science. Be a good example, right? Alcohol is legal, right? There's probably people in here that like to have a glass of wine from time to time, right? There's a big difference between, okay, mom likes to have a glass of wine from time to time with dinner versus mom comes home and has 2 martinis and a 6-pack in order to relax. You're modeling self-medication if you do that. So kids are going to do what they see, right? More so than what you tell them to do, they're going to do what they see. So if you're going to drink, I'm not going to say that that's the worst thing, but I would say make sure you are setting a good example with how you model it to your kids, okay? So just briefly before I pass it along, I don't want to take too much time, but we do have, Rosecrans, we do have an office here in Oak Park where we provide both adolescent and adult assessments free of charge for any type of substance abuse, and now including mental health issues. So please utilize us in any capacity here at Oak Park for those assessments. And then if necessary, we do have a facility out in Rockford as well for substance abuse and mental health if the problem is getting a little bit more out of control or out of hand. Not only for substance abuse, but for mental health as well. So thank you, I appreciate it. Hopefully, I know that was fast. I know I was talking too fast, I get it. But I want to make sure to leave time for other people and leave time for questions and all those things. So thank you very much, I appreciate it.
Thank you, Matt. John, is your presentation up next or the nurses?
I think I'm third.
You guys, okay. We also have a panel of nurses from Rush Oak Park Hospital here with us this evening. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and they have a presentation for us as well.
Thank you. Yes, there's 3 of us here from Rush Oak Park Hospital.
She's got to switch her.
Oh, is the order, okay.
Yes.
Is the order messed up?
No, she's got to pull it up.
Ginger, where'd you go?
Well, we can introduce ourselves. My name's Chris Evans Bergman. I'm a nurse and unit director of the Wound Care Center.
You've got it pretty close to your, there you go.
Can you hear it?
A little closer.
A little closer?
There you go.
I'm Chris Evans Bergman. I'm nurse and unit director of the Wound Care Center at Rush Oak Park Hospital. And I'll let Lisa, you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Lisa. I work in the emergency room at Russell Park.
Yeah, we've got a short cord, sorry about that.
And I'm Sarah Thompson. I work on the skilled care unit.
What's the name of your program?
Prescription misuse, opioids, and stimulants.
There are always technical difficulties. I'm not sure why, but it's something that you can generally count on. You find it?
Yeah.
We got it.
There we go.
All right.
All right, we've already introduced ourselves, so I'm going to get started for the next 5 minutes just to talk about prescription misuse. Is this working?
It was a second ago.
Is it working?
There you go. Just hold it up close.
Some facts is teens get most of the prescription drugs they misuse from family and friends. The National Institute on Drug Abuse says about 48 million people ages 12 and older have used prescription drugs for non-medical reasons in their lifetime. 8 out of 10 children will try alcohol and other drugs before they graduate from high school. And it's not unusual for teens to talk about stealing medications from their parents or relatives' medicine cabinets. Instead of taking illegal substances commonly sold in back alleys, as it was mentioned in the van, some teens tell today of having prescription parties where they gather at someone's home and they mix prescription drugs in a bowl to help themselves to whichever pills look most appealing. Of course, the problem with that is teens have no idea what medications they're taking and what might happen, where some medications can cause serious problems, even death, when mixed with other drugs and alcohol. So the message is pretty obvious: to get rid of expired, unwanted, unused medicines before they become a potential problem. And that's me, Grandma, who's a potential culprit. I put this slide in here as I was preparing for this presentation. It forced me to look at my medicine cabinets. And I had hydrocodone from a prior surgery several years back that I keep just in case. My husband died 15 months ago, and I had his tranquilizers, anti-anxiety medication, anti-seizure, cardiac medications, blood pressure medications. I don't know why we keep these things that we're going to somehow use one day. So I was really glad that this forced me to go through what I have. Being a grandma, my granddaughter, I wouldn't want her coming over and being so easy for her to take something. So I hope you take that away, not only what you have in your own home, but also grandma, grandpa, aunts, and uncles. Don't make it easy. Get rid of it. There's so many ways we can get rid of prescriptions now. So get rid of your unused, unwanted prescriptions. First of all, return them. to an authorized location. If I called my local Walgreens to find out where, and I took them in a bag and was able to dispose of all of them. You can also contact your local law enforcement and find out about where medications you can give back if you're not sure of a disposal location. Or you can learn about the National Prescription Drug Take Back Day, which there are brochures. There's one here in Oak Park this Saturday. You can flush medications down the toilet, but you have to look if the medicine is on the FDA flush list. And if it is, then it's okay to flush. If not, you need to take it to a collection site near you. Or, last of all, you can toss the medication into the household trash, but you have to first mix the meds, not crushing the tablets or capsules, with dirt, kitty litter, or coffee grounds, and place the mixture in a plastic container, and then you can dispose of that in your household trash. Of course, scratch out your personal information on your prescription label of your empty pill bottles. What can you do to prevent your children from using drugs? Parents often underestimate the importance of their influence on their children's decisions about drugs. You play a crucial part in preventing by setting boundaries, expectations, staying involved and engaged in your children's lives, and setting a positive example. Lisa? Lisa will speak to you on opioids.
And hold it up close.
Yeah.
Hold your mic up close.
So my name's Lisa. As I said, I'm a nurse in the emergency room at Retro Park. And bear with me because I'm not a public speaker at all. So here's the title here. You might hear the terms kind of interchangeably, opioids and opiates. But basically opiates are the natural occurring from the poppy seed plant and from the plant directly, while opioids are the synthetic made in the lab and stuff. Prescription opioids are typically for short-term use for acute, moderate to severe pain, and they're not your first line of therapy for long-term chronic pain. They can be highly addictive, as you probably all know, but they should typically be given for a short period of time, especially in a teenager, typically like 3 to 7 days. You're not going to give a long course of days. These are just some, these are just some examples of opioids, just some different names you might see. You'll see 2 names for most of them just because it's most medications have a brand name and a generic name. So it's all one and the same. You just might, like acetaminophen is Tylenol, Motrin is ibuprofen, so just one thing is the brand name. So these are just some typical ones. It's surely not an all-inclusive list. I really don't think they use morphine or fentanyl too much in teenagers. And of course, heroin is an opioid, but it's illegal, so it's not on there. So if your child is prescribed opioids, it's okay to be an advocate and ask the provider who's prescribing it. Could there be an alternative, like an over-the-counter medication, such as Tylenol in combination with a non-steroidal, like aspirin, Motrin, Naproxen? Could they do a non-pharmacological agents like ice therapy, heat therapy, physical therapy, acupuncture? It's okay to ask those questions. But if they are prescribed opioids, you want to check how many pills are being prescribed and for what period of time. Like I said, it should be for a short period of time. The risks of misuse and a child's risk factors. There's a couple things that could put a child more at risk, like a history of ADHD, mental illness, mental health disorders in the family, a recent trauma like a divorce in the family or a death in the family or something like that, or a family history of addiction. Those things are all going to make a child maybe more apt to possibly abuse the drugs.
Keep holding that up close.
If your child is prescribed, if your child is prescribed opioids, what can you do to prevent abuse? Supervised dispensing of the medication, only take prescribed amount and do not mix with alcohol. It can be very deadly to mix with alcohol. The opioids are a central nervous system depressant, can make you sleepy, and then on top of alcohol can be very deadly. Count the pills in the bottle, keep in a secure location in the house or on the person, meaning yourself. Don't share with others and keep out of reach of anybody. They're not intended for, kind of like what Chris alluded to. Obviously, you want to make sure the wrong people aren't getting it. You don't want your child's friends coming into the house and getting it, other siblings in the household. I mean, you know your household the best if you feel like you need to actually lock it up, or if not locking it up, you definitely want to keep an eye on it, on the number of pills being used and things. I would say on a somewhat regular basis in the ER, patients tell me all the time they took either their friends or their family members antibiotic or pain medicine. On a side note, you should never have leftover antibiotics. You always take them to the end. And people tell me all the time, makes me crazy. But also, just with pain medications too, what's good for one person is not necessarily good for another. There's so many factors that go into what you're prescribed: your age, your underlying health conditions, the type of pain, what you're taking it for, broken bone versus, end-stage cancer. So it's a very bad practice to be sharing medications with any family member, antibiotic or pain meds or any meds. Communicate regularly about the level of pain. It should be diminishing over time. It might be a red flag if the child is saying, they want to take it more often than prescribed, or they want to keep getting refills even though the pain should be diminishing over time, not increasing. Communicate about the risks of misuse and dispose of properly when the prescription is done if you have leftovers, just like Chris was talking about the proper ways of disposal. So, as we all know, and why we're here, the opioid crisis has reached epidemic levels in the United States. A person can overdose on opioids if not taken properly. There's a high potential for addiction and abuse, and it often begins in risk-taking teens. I kind of said the risk factors, and also the earlier you start, kind of to what the first gentleman spoke of, the earlier you start, the more chance of it being a problem later on. If you're starting at 12, 13, and people can get addicted even just from starting on pain medications prescribed for a sports injury, or dental wisdom tooth bulging, or prescribed opioids. But typical gateway drugs, nicotine, alcohol, marijuana are typical gateway drugs to opioid abuse, along with, like I said, even just taking prescription opioids. These are just a varied amount of signs and symptoms for misuse or withdrawal of opioids. Kind of the first one I said, be concerned if you're asking for payment more frequently than prescribed or insisting on refill. And then all these other things, there's so many more, but they can all be signs. And I think some of them were even in the truck about things to look for. You know your child the best, when they're just not acting right, something's not right. So the takeaway is just be vigilant if your child is prescribed opioids. I'm not saying, you can never have them get opioids for their, sports injury or broken bone or whatever, but just be vigilant, be an advocate for your child. It's okay to ask the provider, it's okay to ask them. You can question them. People are scared to question, it's okay to just be an advocate and be vigilant about watching things, and then consult the prescriber of the medication if you're concerned about dependence.
So like I said earlier, my name is Sarah. I work on the skilled care unit, which is subacute rehab. Oh, I was on the same presentation.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Did you have misunderstood what you're saying?
Keep going.
So part of the thing with stimulants, my daughter was, she has ADHD, and she was taking, she is still taking Adderall for her ADHD, and she went to OPRF. And she said all the time kids would ask, all the time kids would ask to buy her medication from her. And one kid even stole her whole entire bottle of brand new pills. She had to threaten him that she was going to go to the cops and to her parents, and he gave them back to her. First he said he lost a couple, and she was like, well, I'm going to tell the cops that you took my pills, and then he mysteriously found them. So if your kids are taking any prescription medications like that, just make sure that they're keeping them very safe, because other children will steal them. So stimulants, they're generally used to treat ADHD and narcolepsy. Most kids are using them to treat ADHD. Some of the names are Adderall, Ritalin, Concerta, and they increase the activity of the brain, chemicals dopamine, and norepinephrine. So how are they misused? Any way you're taking them any way that other than prescribed, taking somebody else's medication, taking the medication only for the effect that it causes to get high, and then they can be taken by mouth, crushed, injected, snorted, or smoked. So people use it because you do feel a rush, but it does increase blood flow and heart rate. Breathing decreases increases blood pressure, decreases blood flow, increases blood sugar, opens up your breathing passages. It can lead to a dangerously high body temperature, irregular heartbeat, heart failure, and seizures. And the high is usually followed by a low, which includes feelings of exhaustion, apathy, and depression. So why are they abused? Because a lot of kids use them because they want to study for an exam or something, especially when they get to college. They're under a lot of pressure, so they'll take other people's medications, and so they can stay up all night studying. They also can be used for weight loss, since that's a common side effect, and people say it makes them feel good, gives them energy. I've even heard of like adults abusing them because they'll just clean the house all day or whatever. So what are the common side effects? Misuse of prescription stimulants can cause psychosis, anger, or paranoia. Obviously, injecting any drugs can increase your risk for developing like HIV or hepatitis, and an overdose can occur. So it can produce a life-threatening reaction or even death. So some of the symptoms of overdose, restlessness, tremors, rapid breathing, aggression, there's a whole list. You also have heart problems, including irregular heartbeat, which can lead to a heart attack. Nerve problems can lead to seizures, and abnormally high or low blood pressure. And it does cause stomach problems like nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, stomach cramps. And it can result in convulsions, coma, and fatal poisoning. So what do you do if you think that your child is overdosing? Obviously, you would want to call 911 or bring them to the nearest emergency room. First responders and emergency room doctors will try to treat the overdose. That's it.
I gotta get my
Oh, you
slides.
get-
Sorry about it.
Our next presenter and handyman with all things technological over here is John Rogers, who joins us tonight from HERO. And HERO is the organization that provided the mobile unit that you all walked through. John has some information to share with us.
Before we get started with that, though, if you have any questions that you would like for the panelists, go ahead and write those on the index cards that were on the seat. And then also, if you would take just a few minutes to fill out the survey as well. All right, thanks. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Pamela for inviting Hero to be here tonight, and thank you, all of you, for coming out tonight. You'll see from my comments, I'm pretty passionate about this. And the other speakers, thank you for your comments, because I think I can speed through mine a little quicker. Kids experiment with drugs. Shouldn't shock anybody here. I spoke to many of you as you waited in line out there, but the Illinois Youth Survey, most surveys say that by senior year, half of all kids, high school seniors, will have tried some type of substance abuse. So we have a serious problem in our country. I looked over my slides and I still kept parents beware there. What I'm about to show you, I hope will startle you, because I'm recruiting heroes. I'm a retired police officer, but I'm telling you right now, it shames me to say that we're losing the war on drugs. We've been losing it for 20 years. We need help. We need comprehensive solutions. We need everybody to get involved. I have an old saying I use with Hero: everybody can do something. And by the way, the trailer will remain open, so if you didn't get a chance to see it, you will get to. And thank you for your patience out there. I already mentioned I'm a retired police officer. I'm a retired college professor. I wore a lot of hats. I had to raise 4 kids, and they all had to go to good schools, or I wasn't doing my job. They used to tease me at work, "Captain, why do you have so many jobs?" And I said, "I got 4 reasons at home." So, but you know, I think I was made to do this job, but the good Lord did something very terrible to my family. He took my youngest son from me in a drug overdose death in 2009. Now, I think I'm perfectly suited for this, but I told some of you out in the line, I think, that, you know, from Las Vegas, when the gunshots start ringing out, we run towards the problem, not away from it. I can't run from this. Our kids are at risk. If they're trying vaping, if they're trying binge drinking, those are gateway drugs. Once the kids go through that, they were given DARE, right? Well, you know what the problem is? Kids wake up the next day and they don't have a third eye in their forehead, so you can't scare kids. Kids are risk takers. They are going to experiment. And you know who's going to infect them with this disease of drug substance abuse? Their friends. It's going to happen to them. They're going to be asked. I met a young woman who started high school with Billy, my youngest son who died, and he said, I was doing an intervention for their family, but she said, Mr. Roberts, I don't know if you know or not, but we started the same day. The first 2 days in high school, I was offered drugs 3 times. So we have a problem. This is where the infection typically starts, so that's why when I was talking to you guys out in the line, why we need our schools and our parents to get involved. I call it the triad. I will have spoken to 5,000 kids by the end of this semester, and I'm talking to parents every chance I get, and I'm talking to faculty and school nurses. We have to protect our kids. We have to warn them. What is HERO? Cops love acronyms, you know, like SWAT. I always say, because we don't remember the big words. After 48 years in law enforcement, I can do that. But you know, Heroin Epidemic Relief Organization, truthfully, that name gave us the letter E. In 2009, when I lost my son, I mean, we had a short, desperate battle to keep him away from some of the serious drugs that he had been introduced to by friends. And when I saw what was going on, he said, this is an emerging epidemic. And if it could get into my house, it can get into everybody's house. There's other Billies out there, so I'm out here fighting. The word epidemic had to be in our name. When we first introduced that, like in this audience, I'd see people nudging, hey, a broken-hearted dad, trying to make it something that it isn't. It is an epidemic, the likes of which our nation's never seen, and I'll give you the data. That's why I founded HERO. The young man next to him is Matthew Kirk. We had moved from Chicago after I retired from the police department in 2004. I was 33 years in the Chicago Police Department. Homer Glen. I could see a farm from my back deck. I said, okay, I'm far enough away from the city, we're safe. No. I mean, drugs had left the city, into the suburbs, then into the hinterland. They're in our farm communities. I've been to many of them. They've invited us out to help. These 2 boys, that's the new face of heroin. Once the gateway drugs, once kids try something, somebody's going to come along and say, here, try this. You know, Vicodin. Or even if it's just an innocent thing where, you know, an athlete is prescribed Vicodin, it's very easy to fall under the spell of that addictive drug. And I'll show you how this epidemic got started. Something that you need to know, I use a lot of these slides when I talk to the school kids. You know, I tell them, Billy and Matt were just like you. They were good kids from good families, you know, well-adjusted socially, hockey player. Billy was a soccer player. I mean, you would never think that they would die before in their teen years from heroin overdose. How is that possible? How much do I miss them? My words are too feeble. I won't try to tell you. My wife Donna is here, and I can see by the look on her face, she has a hard time with these slides. That's a picture of Billy and I off to Mercy Harbor on the Mr. Roberts. We keep our boat there. And I also tell the kids in school, look at the smile on his face. And I tell the kids, you can find so much joy in life. Drugs cannot do that for you. Joy, he jumped into the 59-degree water with his crazy dad, and look what happened. I mean, that's a natural high. But what did Billy leave behind? Flip the coin over, what did we lose? We lost a wonderful boy. I mean, he was really just like all of your kids. And that's why I'm here tonight. You know, I call him the lost boy. Billy experimented with drugs. He started drinking. My neighbor said, hey, new neighbor, look behind your shed. I had built a fire pit for the kids out in my new home. Well, there was a bunch of empty beer cans behind the shed. So Billy was grounded for a couple of weeks. I mean, I responded, I knew, you know, but what I didn't expect or know is just how prevalent drugs were out there in a suburban community. And we're in a suburb now. So, yeah, the problem we are experiencing is so dramatic. You know, just about now, I hope you are asking, is this guy being overly dramatic, or is he telling the truth? Is substance abuse that bad in this nation? I have no hesitation. One word answer, yes, and I'll show you the data. I mean, I decided early on, looking at the data in 2009, when I lost Billy, that this is an emerging epidemic. The data proved it. I didn't care if people scoffing in audiences. It was growing and spreading so quick. I thought it was, maybe it's just Homer Glen. So I called the fire chief in Orland Park, who's our suburb to the east. They were averaging 4 heroin overdoses a month. And that it's gotten worse, naturally, over the last 10 years. But everybody I talked to, I taught college, I taught criminal justice, I knew police officers from all over the suburban area. Everybody I talked to, every speech I gave in their communities, I was hearing the same thing. We have a real serious problem with serious drugs. It is an epidemic, and you guys know what that means. You may challenge me on that first bullet. Is it an infectious disease? Well, here's what I tell the kids in school. That's how it starts. Another child, another kid in school will, hey, come on. Why are you here at a party if you're not going to have some fun? Come on with me. I'm going to give you something. So we have a serious problem. That's how it's spreading. But you know, something that's real important too for you guys to take away tonight, it's a disease. The brain does begin to change, and that's exactly correct. It starts with any drugs you put into your system. But you know, go home tonight, I tell the kids to do this, check brain imaging and substance abuse and see what happens. You know, Matt had a slide that talked about how the brain is developing as a teenager. I tell the kids, the good Lord, it's called pruning. We're born with too many brain cells. We don't need them all. We don't use them all. In teen years, they start pruning away the unused brain cells, and then in their place, they have neural pathways to speed up and make highly efficient your brain. So I tell the kids, you start using drugs, and what will happen is it will start to destroy your brain. Okay? Gradually, slowly, change you. It changes you. You'll never be that same person. If you fall under the spell of a drug and become addicted, you'll never be that same person. You'll carry that addiction the rest of your life. Hopefully you'll be abstinent, you'll recover and stay away from it. But, you know, your brain chemistry, brain structure changes. That's why it's so hard to recover. And worse, the mortality rate is incredible. The drugs coming into this wonderful country of ours are so powerful, and it's getting worse each year. 3 waves of the drug epidemic. This is primarily opioids, but back in the late 90s, the American Medical Association told doctors you must treat pain as a primary symptom. You cannot let your patient out of the office without talking about their pain and doing something about it. That's why medicine cabinets are loaded with painkillers. Since the late 90s, the U.S. has quadrupled the number of pain prescriptions that we are selling, and the U.S. is consuming 90 to 95% of it. It's a U.S. problem. Now that started it when kids can no longer get the pills out of the medicine cabinet. They go on the street. An OxyContin can cost you $80. So where are your kids going to get it? Well, somebody will come along and say, well, you know, I know you're not feeling well, it's called withdrawal. No, they won't tell them that. They'll say, I know where you can get something that'll help you. And they aim them to somebody who can sell them heroin. $10 a bag. I mean, from here to the west side of Chicago, and at one time they had 200 open-air drug markets for $10. One of our kids, you know, you can drive here. Can I have the keys, Mom and Dad? I want to go somewhere. Well, that was happening so often they called 290 Heroin Highway. I'm sure you've heard that. So with the heroin demand going up, the amount of drugs coming across our southern border is incredible. It's been going on for decades and decades. The Mexican gangs used to come through the mountain passes with tons of marijuana. They know how to do this stuff. Well, believe it or not, the Colombian cartels hired those gangs to bring in their cocaine after Reagan shut down the Florida seaports. It made it real hard to get into Louisiana and Florida, so The Mexican games became their transporters. They were good at it. So good that they said, why do we need the Colombians? Now they're some of the biggest cartels in the world, and they're killing many, many, many American citizens. When I started as a police officer in Chicago in 1973, heroin was cut so often by everybody who bought their supply, and they doubled their profit by adding milk sugar, baby formula. Well, it was 4 to 7% pure. The only way to get high was to inject it. There's so much heroin coming across our borders over the last 10 years or so. On average, back in 2010, the purity level was 20%. Our kids found out you could now smoke it or snort it. So, yeah, you know what, if you can't get opium, you can't get painkillers because they cost so much, you can get heroin, and you can get it just about anywhere. So the third wave, and that's the black line, and you can see just how dramatic that is. You've heard fentanyl, you hear it on the news. Fentanyl is 50 to 80 times stronger than that strong heroin of 2010. That they called it the new heroin. 20% was unheard of. A friend of mine with the DEA told me back in 2010, they did a sample purchase at several locations, 20%. Well, now fentanyl is 50 to 80 times stronger. And that's just there's other analogs. So, and by the way, I was at the DEA last week, and my friend was there. I hadn't seen him in years, and I said, by the way, Pat, his name is Pat O'Day, but I said, isn't it true some of our drugs are coming across the Canadian border too, like China to Vancouver and Vancouver down? And he laughed. He said, no, John, not at all. It's all coming from Mexico, or it's being mailed in. Kids are so good. I can spell computer with a K. I'm not good at it, but our kids are. They know how to go on the dark web. They can order fentanyl from China, and it will be mailed to their home. So we have a serious problem, and it's only getting worse. Just in passing, heroin, that's a lethal dose. That's a 2-inch by 1/2-inch vials. Fentanyl is in the middle. I mean, I used to say take a salt shaker and just, well, now you can see that's enough to kill you. The third one is carfentanil. Anybody who likes the movie, the dinosaur movie, Jurassic Park, next time you watch it, listen closely, and they'll say, go get the carfentanil, we got to put this dino down. It's 10,000 times stronger than heroin. So that is what's going into our drug supply in our nation. Here's the evidence I talked about. 1999, upper left-hand corner. The red indicates it's a scattergram, but deaths exceeding 100 per 100,000. And it's hard to read this fine print. But 1999, that was what we were used to. I mean, every death is a tragedy, every overdose death. But, you can see what was happening. Well, heroin, I was talking with Pam earlier, heroin was just about gone off the streets of Chicago. I know, I mean, I was there. Crack was going crazy. I retired in 2004. I left an apartment thinking, heroin was just about gone. Well, wrong. I lost Billy in 2009. There, that's 2009. You can see how bad it had gotten. Well, that year we lost about 28,000 American citizens to drug overdose. Look at our 2015 map. I usually tell the kids in school, I show them this. This is your nation, this is your century, your millennials, and this is how it's starting out. Please, God, stay away from drugs. How bad is it? My early speeches, I said, I hope we never eclipse 52,000. There it is. I'm waiting for the CDC to release the data. When it goes this late in the year, it usually means it's really bad news. I expect it'll go over 80,000. Anybody here want to guess how many citizens we've lost since the beginning of this century? 800,000. Once we get the 2018 data, 800,000. I'm afraid that we will soon not eclipse 50,000, we'll eclipse 1 million U.S. citizens have died from this epidemic. It's not enough people are talking about it, not enough people are doing anything about it. How can someone tell they're going to become addicted? I ask the kids that, and usually we'll go, you're okay, you're okay, you're okay, don't ever use drugs. I mean, you don't know. You just don't know. I mean, if you have, you had some data here earlier, but if you have substance abuse or alcoholism in your family, I mean, there are some predispositions, but I tell the kids, you don't know. You experiment with something, you may end up like my son. And that's why I'm here. I don't want that to happen. So I tell them, my best advice, don't start. I usually ask everybody. I said it earlier, but you know, Hero was started by Matthew Kirk's dad and Billy's dad. And if two dads can do what we're doing, you saw our trailer, I've been doing this for 10 years. This month alone, this is my 24th event or meeting. I'm fighting, I told you I had passion, I'm fighting to save your kids. Everybody can do something. So everyone can, you know, take a stand. Like I told the kids, not in our nation, not in our century, not in our time. This is our time. Don't let this happen. Teach the kids to stay strong. I told all of you outside, have that drug talk with your kids. Open the door. The people they trust the most on the planet are you. Next to you are those teachers and counselors and nurses. Who can they go to? Let's all stand together and warn them. I'd like to see every school, drug education, it should start in middle school all the way through college. Every year it should be a mandatory, it should be a law. I think every school should get involved like this school is. This is really cool. You live in a great community and it proves, the school has proven it to you. Strongly support intolerance for any glamorization. And this is where I take a swipe at my colleagues, my fellow teachers. Breaking Bad. I've never watched even 1 second of the program. You know the theme? A high school teacher who lost his job. He was a chemistry teacher, so he turned to making meth. I'm sorry, no, do not glamorize drugs. Meth, next to heroin, meth is the most deadly substance on the planet. And then the last one, expect political leaders to lead the fight. I was interviewed yesterday by somebody from Hearst Publications. They asked me, Donald Trump and Melania Trump were in Atlanta yesterday at an opioid conference, and they asked me what I thought of him. And I said, you know, he's given us voice. He's given us $8.1 billion last year, and I think he said there's $6 billion more. He's leading this fight. He's doing things. He's not waiting, and he's not just talking about it. He's doing something about it. And we all have to use that money in every state in the nation to fight this epidemic. Do like I've done. Get on the internet and see if there's ever been a worse epidemic in this nation. There hasn't been. And we've seen other actions taken, swine flu, avian flu. They marshal everybody in the community to be ready for it. Well, when have you been asked to do it? So you guys have a choice to make with respect to the way our nation is going. Please choose to be a hero. By that I mean stand up against this evil, malevolent force that has swept across our nation. It's, you know, here in Cook County, we lost over 1,000 people. We lost 2,000 in the state of Illinois. There's 300,000 people in the state that need drug treatment. This state, this location has a serious problem. I was telling Pam, I read an article and I didn't save it or print it. The article said that there is an opioid problem in every county in our nation now. When do we stop? We have to stop it now. So please choose to fight back. Protect your kids, protect your neighbors' kids. It's a worthy fight because of the way that we're going now, we may see 1.5 million in about 10 years. 1.5 million deaths from drugs. You know, the AIDS epidemic was put to a stop during my police career in about 5 to 6 years, and now there's a cure. Well, you know what? We have to push on all fronts. So I'll stop there because we have a panel, we have questions here. I'm sure you guys have a lot.
We were going to, are you hearing me? We were going to have you write down questions. If you have any, please hand them to us. If you would prefer to just stand up and ask them, do so in a loud voice. It is almost 8 o'clock, and that was when we were hoping to be finished, but conversation is so important, and the support of other parents is so important in facing these challenges. So many times in conversations about alcohol, we have, with Positive Youth Development, talked with parents, and you can feel like you are the only person in the world who is facing these challenges until you begin to talk to each other. And then you realize that a lot of us are in the same boat with trying to keep our children safe. Are there any questions? Anybody?
Yeah, I've got a question. So maybe
Sure.
for this gentleman or the panel is, you made me think, you know, we've got AIDS, we have cancer, and everyone's marshaling around that. This is a huge epidemic. What is preventing the same sort of responsiveness to get behind that?
I think in maybe one word is stigma. It's a dirty, nasty habit. I mean, think of the names we used to call. I mean, I was a police officer, junkie, hype. I mean, all these nasty names, and they're the people who lived under viaducts. So when Billy first contracted his addiction, I could see he's falling under the spell. I was working at Lewis University, surrounded by colleagues with the training that could have helped save his life. But I was the chair of criminal justice. How can I say that? So that's one reason. You know, the AIDS had a similar stigma, but they fought that one off. So, you know what it's going to take is just awareness. You know, you can't solve a problem until you know what it is. And now we have to do something about it. You know, the Obama administration has some great strategies. I run them all. I use them in the classroom. You know, in the last 2 years, like I say, I think he said $6 billion. That would be $14 billion the president is throwing at this problem. They should have been throwing billions at it for the last 10 years. You know, I want to start a campaign for politicians in our nations, DYJ. Do your job. Stop fighting with each other and start saving our kids. 800,000 American citizens have died. What's been done about it? So a lot of it is political fights, and you know, everybody has to be right. Nobody can be wrong. Well, you know what? My son died. A lot of kids are dying, and we've got to make them do their job.
Yeah, I agree with him. I think it's kind of stigma, and it is the junkie, you know, a lot of times people go hand in hand with crime and homelessness and mental illness, but there's definitely something to be said for decriminalizing. It's a disease, just like alcoholism is a disease, and I think the stigma is a big part of it. Like, people look down upon it because you think, oh, the drug on the street, but we see heroin overdoses virtually every day of the year, sometimes more than one, and it's we can get prisoners that have been locked up in the county jail just for a day or two, and they come into withdrawal. It's very hard, very, very hard for them to get off and stay off. I could probably attest to it. So it's a disease, and it's very hard to get and stuff.
Good question.
This cord is going to do us. Yes.
I'm just wondering, based on the experience of everybody, let's say, what are some things you can, like, if of kids that you've seen that have recovered from these situations, is there like some phrases that they would say, like, I wish someone had told me this, or I wish my parents had said that? Are there any like golden phrases that, you know, that people say, I wish I had known, I wish my parents had told me, or just wondering.
I think it's been commonly misunderstood historically, and there was a trend in the 90s to address pain with a pill. And I think that was commonly misunderstood by people who began to treat chronic pain, how addictive some of these medications were. Hearing a lot on the news about pharmaceutical companies that did know how addictive they were and are now being held to account. But the way that the whole epidemic started, I think, was a reflection of a particular time when pain medication was handled differently than it had been historically. And I think that kids don't understand the path to addiction is not something that anybody ever does deliberately. It starts in very small steps and accelerates rapidly. And I think you all would agree with that. And it's commonly misunderstood, especially by kids, because kids are not big on understanding consequences. Teenagers especially. So, Matt.
Like John said, having worked with teens for 15 plus years now, what I hear as they progress through that is not realizing how quickly, because some people are just susceptible because of their family history, because of other mental health issues, trauma, where I hear all the time, I had no idea how quickly it can move from fun, because it starts out fun. You rarely will hear an addict that says when they first start out, when I first started, it was trouble. No, there's a honeymoon period. But then if you have that predisposition, very quickly, within just usually a couple of years, it quickly transitions into something that's a whole different animal. So that's what I hear all the time is I had no idea how quickly, once I started, I didn't realize how quickly it could grab me. I thought, because I would see kids around me that could take it or leave it, I always thought I could be like them or wanted to be like them. And I saw them taking it or leaving it, I knew I was using more. So that's what I hear most often.
Yeah, Annie.
Are you seeing a surge, like I've noticed with like the legalization of marijuana, a more like laid back like thing with, you know, edibles and things seeming acceptable, particularly to teens to college age students, and how do we get in front of that? You know, I have a freshman, but it's common knowledge that, you know, marijuana is all over the place and it's acceptable, and it seems like it's being used more than alcohol in the high school, and it alarms me. And
Yeah,
I'm
so
wondering if you
the
had any.
comparison I always make when you talk about this epidemic that John talked about, if you visualize that to be like a bonfire, well, how we're approaching marijuana as a society now is like, you know, the self-starting fireplaces where you don't even have to do anything, you just turn on the gas and it starts up. Marijuana right now, how it's being perceived and handled is like gas underneath that bonfire that you can't see very well. In terms of the messaging that we're providing for kids, in terms of it being medicine and legalization, it's, you know, you can talk about it being 21 and older and all this legislation. The problem is that the message that kids are getting through all this legislation is that it's not a big deal. We're doing a terrible job of providing appropriate message to teens of what the dangers of it could be and even getting started and tripping off that predisposition that I talked about. But the good news in that is that in each of our own households, my oldest is going to be 11 this year, so I'm freaking out, right? Because it's like, we're right on the precipice potentially of legal marijuana. But I have to remind myself that I can still in my home create my own individual message that's independent of, it's going to be difficult, but I have to believe that I can create I already have my soon to be 11-year-old. You know what, yeah, Dad, I know if I do any of this stuff, it messes with my brain development, makes me more, it's like, wow, I didn't know she was ready to recite that to me. But that gives me hope that I brainwashed her, and then we will continue to brainwash her in a way where she understands that the messages she might get outside the household aren't always gonna be the best. So I don't know if that's a complete answer, but it's.
If I can, remember the triangle I mentioned? The parents, the school, and the child? We have to be aligned. We have to work together. It has to be a consistent message. Kids have to know. Yet here in school, you know, cognitively, let the teachers, the federal government has provided all sorts of PowerPoint, lesson plans, video, and there are true life stories of young people who became addicted. I mean, if you needed to look at those, and then if you can convince a teenager to do anything, it's like herding cats. But if here, I dare you, look at this film and you tell me what you think after you're done. But I said about opening that door, moms and dads, please talk to your kids, do the best you can. I'm afraid they are going to legalize marijuana. Other countries have tried this, and they have a two-headed monster now because not everybody can buy the legal marijuana. So you're still going to have gangs selling dope on the corners. So you're going to have crime and crime problems and shootings. And you're going to now make it readily available, and it'll be like our medicine cabinets. Parents are going to have their recreational marijuana at home. It's going to be more available. It's going to cause us a lot of trouble. So the best you can do is try and not all children grow up to be alcoholics. We can teach them how to do things responsibly. I would say stay away from drugs, because watch the brain imaging research. It does. Marijuana is 4 times stronger than it was 30 years ago. It's hybrid. I mean, these guys are good. 4 times stronger. Yes, ma'am.
Right now with the vaping epidemic, which is really what it is in the high schools, where they can pretty much pass it among each other in class and smoke it without, or inhale it, or whatever you call it, without teacher knowledge, and in many cases in bathrooms and everywhere else. Like right now, I think they're pretty much addicted to it. It's not what's in their body, the process of doing it. It's not cool if you say no to someone handing it to you. I mean, what do you do when you tackle them and take it away day after day after day, and they just buy more and more? And like, how do you get to the point where you're like on top of it? As she mentioned, like it's so everywhere. It's just it's so disturbing to be like thinking that you've gotten rid of all of it, and then there it is again in the next day that you are like, oh my gosh, you look like you're high. Are you vaping nicotine? That's what you look like when you, or is it, marijuana? What are you vaping? How do you get on top of that? You just take it away from them again and again and again and hope that they make it to their senior, graduation, and then you say, okay, thank God you're alive, and moving to the next stage. Hopefully your brain now will be able to make better choices. I mean, it's so hard to know how to handle it.
Yes. Fight that fight.
I mean, I am, but I'm
Again,
saying,
keep doing it, because it might seem like at times you're fighting an uphill battle, but please make sure that they understand why you're doing it, because teenagers will misperceive that as being that you're trying to control them. And that's not what you're trying to do. You're trying to look out for them. So make sure they understand brain development, risk for, make sure that you say that. But there comes a certain point where, because I've worked with parents where they put article after article, which is great, but the articles only do so much good after a while. At some point, they know why you're doing what you're doing. You have to just keep fighting the fight. Search their rooms, check their phones, take it away, drug test, all of these things. Hold that line, because if you don't hold that line, then you have an issue where it's going to probably more quickly progress to other things. So even if you're fighting that struggle now, if they're holding with a jewel, okay, that's not great, but at least you might be holding the line with that versus it progressing into something much worse.
Tell your child you don't know, he doesn't know what he's getting. I tell that to every school kid. I 30 schools, 40 schools this year, over this year, school year. But you saw outside in the trailer that many of the prescription pills being sold now are counterfeit. Most of it is fentanyl. Unless the pharmacist hands it to you, Xanax, it could be fentanyl shaped like a Xanax bar. So that's going on. Vaping, it's very easy. The kids know how to do it. They can put cannabis oil in there, and what he's paying. So tell your child that you don't know what you're getting, and the kid who's giving it to you may not know what it is either. And tell him my son's story. On the way home from his part-time school job, Wendy's, the guy, I used to pick him up every night. Dad, I got a ride. Well, the guy said, hey, you want to try something? And handed him a smoldering pipe. Billy thought it was marijuana. It was heroin. How does it get started? How did my son? Think of the best food you ever had and think of the first time you had it. And then what was it? Then, hey, next time I'm in town, I'm going to that restaurant. That's what happens. Billy tried it. He liked it. The same guy gave him a ride home again. In a very short order, he was falling, I call it falling under the spell. He was a growing addiction. So tell your child you don't know what they're giving you. You can quote me, they can call me, I'll talk to him because his life is precious.
Every time I talked and I do talk all the time about, what I hear, there's so many deaths now from marijuana that they found it was synthetic, and so these kids have died from it. So you don't know what you're getting, who you're getting it from, so it's not okay. Now this baby's having seizures, et cetera, et cetera. Just whenever I hear, I try to pass it on and say the same thing. You just wait until you're an adult and your brain is fully formed, then make those choices and see if you still feel the same way about it. But wait until then. But what I hear from them is that it's propaganda. What we learned is propaganda. And maybe what you're hearing now is propaganda. I try to come back with it. They have an answer for every.
And it's compounded by teenagers are risk takers and thrill seekers. We all were. Okay, so what works, I'm sure my story probably horrified you. It may not always work with the kids. I take a different approach with them. But you know what? We are getting across to them. If everybody keeps telling them this is very, very dangerous stuff. You don't know what it is. And then, I had a mom come that we do family support, we do grief support, but a mom showed up first time, went around the circle, got to her. She said, it's my first time here. I lost my only daughter. She was 18. And by all accounts from all of her friends, I've spoken to all of them, she never even smoked a cigarette. Wine, beer, she never did any of that. Well, her best friend at a sleepover said, you want to try something? Just like Billy, gave her a pipe. She died that night. First time she ever tried anything. Tell your child that story. The stuff that's coming across. our borders is so powerful. You don't know what's being delivered to your children. Tell them that. Tell them, you know, the fentanyl stories, where I'm not making this stuff up. I mean, the lead analyst at DEA in Chicago office told me about how much fentanyl, and it's all coming from our southern boundaries. It's coming in by the ton. I mean, fentanyl, you don't need the poppy anymore. Think about that. You know, you had to go to Afghanistan or Southeast Asia to get poppies to make opium, to make heroin. Well, now all you need is chemicals, and it's going to get worse and worse and worse. So,
We are going to need to wrap up. I've been
There's the hook.
asked to tell you. I've been asked to tell you that the trailer will be open until 8:30. If you've not had a chance to go through, that's 15 more